if you have questions during the presentation, you can use the chat feature, which is sort of looks like a little talk bubble. If you press that, you can type in your questions into the chat. So if you have a question that comes up during Josh's presentation, go ahead and type it in there. And at the end of the presentation, we'll leave some time for questions and we'll go through those questions that show up in the chat. And with that, I would like to introduce our speaker for today, Joshua Chenoweth, who was the restoration ecologist for the Elwha River restoration and is currently a senior riparian ecologist for the Yurok Tribe. And so I'll let Josh give more about his background, and I'm really interested to learn more about the project that Josh is currently working on. So thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Dean. I appreciate that. Everyone hear me okay? I think I have my mute off. Yeah, so I want to just start off before I dive into this and thank Olympic National Park because working on the Elwha project was a dream come true, and they took a chance on me to do that. Worked on that project for 10 years, and then that led to this project. So, Elwha was the biggest dam removal in the world. Now there's Klamath, so I can't let that happen without me. And it's all because of, Olympic National Park taking a chance on me, and I really appreciate that. I miss it up there. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and dive into my presentation. So this is a talk about the Klamath Dam removal project and how the Elwha has influenced what we're doing down here to prepare and implement revegetation. So for those who are new or don't know this project, the Klamath watershed is huge. It encompasses, it basically starts up at Crater Lake, and it travels through Southern Oregon, down through California, and I think it's the third largest watershed in the Klamath. In California, excuse me. And there are 4 dams that are going to be removed. The first one is located at River Mile 190, and that's the Iron Gate Dam. And then right behind the Iron Gate, about 9 miles upstream, are 2 more dams, Copco 1 and Copco 2. They're very close to one another. One's just a diversion dam, and the other one actually creates the Copco Reservoir, which is the largest of the 3 reservoirs. And then upstream of that in Oregon is J.C. Boyle. That's the smallest of the 3 reservoirs, and it's about 35 miles from Iron Gate. So when you're thinking about a project of this scale, all 3 reservoirs are large and on their own. They're big. They have their own unique characteristics, but of course they're 35 miles apart, and they cross 2 state lines. And there's a change in elevation from the lowest point, which is around 1,900 feet at Iron Gate Dam, to J.C. Boyle, which is 1,700 feet higher at 3,800 feet. So quite different ecology, particularly from the elevation change, let alone the fact that they're 35 miles apart. And when you look at these reservoirs closely, it's a lot like the Elwha in the sense that 85% of the landscape that's going to be exposed are uplands. So people think of dam removal projects as riparian restoration projects, and they are. This is a salmon restoration project. But when it comes to revegetation, most of what we have to deal with are uplands. Also, like the Elwha, there's a lot of sediments. So in the reservoirs, in these Klamath reservoirs, most of the sediments are in Copco and Iron Gate Reservoir. There's an estimated 15 million cubic yards. They're mostly fine textured, but they're super variable in their composition. So the clay component is anywhere from 17 to 78% of the sediments. So 78% is an incredibly high number for clay, and could create real challenges. There's also a lot of sand in some places. So in some places there's 56%, which would be helpful. These are pictures from a drawdown that was conducted in 2020. And you can see a lot of cracking from the fine sediments drying, which is not all that different from what it looked like in the Elwha. So here's the Elwha. These are pictures from 2011 at Lake Aldwell. These are also the fine sediments behaving in very similar ways what you just saw in those Klamath pictures. The Elwha had about 26 million cubic yards, so a lot more, although only 9 million cubic yards were fine, but the proportion was much greater in the Elwha because the Elwha was a total of around 750 acres that were exposed, whereas we're looking at 2,000 acres down here on the Klamath. So the distribution of sediments isn't quite as extensive, but it is going to cover all the valley wall. And then, of course, in the Elwha, there wasn't as much variability in the texture. It was pretty consistently dominated by silt with a smaller clay component and not much sand. The other difference is the sediments in Klamath, we're going to have these layers of blue-green algae. So one of the nasty things about these reservoirs is they are excellent habitat for it's a native blue-green algae that really explodes because of the high levels of nitrogen from all the cattle in the upper watershed, so up in Klamath Falls area. And it comes down and loves the reservoirs because the reservoirs warm up, and it explodes and actually poisons the lake and makes the river also poisonous all the way down to the mouth 190 miles away. But these layers will die and settle into the sediments and could actually provide a positive from a re-veg perspective by giving us some organic matter. The blue-green algae themselves are not toxic, so it's not a problem of toxicity in the sediments. It's just an off-gassing that they do that happens in the river. So that's not going to be a problem in the sediments. So the climate is very different down here, as you can imagine. I'm going to just show you the profiles of temperatures between the two. So in the Elwha, the dashed line is the high, average highs throughout the year, and the solid line are your average lows. And so you can see that, it gets into the lower 70s in July and August. And most of the year it's, pretty mild, 40s, 50s, 60s, and the lows aren't really that low. Down here, the Kopko Reservoir, the highs are a lot higher. So our winters aren't really all that different from up there as far as temperatures, but our summers are dramatically different. So we're in the 90s in July and August, sometimes in June. And the lows actually are a bit lower in the winter because of the elevation, and slightly warmer in the summer months. Precipitation is really the big driver. So when we look at the difference in precipitation, here's the Elwha. You can see, as you guys know, it's wet in the fall and winter and spring, and really doesn't do much, not much moisture in the summer. We have that same pattern down here, but the max, the averages are much lower, and our annual precipitations are around 20 inches. So similar to Squim, actually. But when you add that heat, that makes things a lot more dynamic and difficult for plants. The result of these temperature differences and precipitation differences are actually quite profound. So we have around J.C. Boyle, you get ponderosa pine forests, you get some chaparral, but Iron Gate's where you really see a lot of these dynamics in play. So when you reduce your temperatures, when your temperatures are high and you don't have a lot of moisture, then you get a lot of different plant communities. Certain things can't tolerate the south-facing slope, so you get oak juniper woodlands. We see a lot of chaparral. My PowerPoint appears to be frozen. There we go. So chaparral is just shrublands with chaparral species, so a lot of ceanothus and persias, and then we do get lush riparian forests, but they're pretty narrow along the rivers. And then we get grasslands. And so what we want around there are native grasslands. And this is a nice spot near Iron Gate where it's pretty healthy, but that's unusual. Most of the grasslands are dominated by invasives. So a lot of these non-native grasses, we're talking about 62% not native. and 36% of the species of the abundance is actually invasive. And it's really these three species that you're looking at here. We have yellow star thistle, cheatgrass, and medusa head, and they are dominant. And one of the reasons is cattle. So it's an open graze area. So cattle are roaming all around, and they eat the good stuff and don't eat the bad stuff and drag the bad stuff around on their hooves. And you end up with these non-native grasslands. And there's wild horses. So those pressures are significant and are going to be a challenge for revegetation. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about project goals. Before I do, I like to kind of show people how this project's managed. So a big difference between Elwha and Klamath is the way it's managed. The Elwha was a National Park Service project, and it was on National Park Service land. So that made things a lot less complicated. There were complications because of impacts downstream, but we have that issue here. And on top of that, it's a mixed land use and mixed land ownership. And so the KIRC was formed as a nonprofit between the states and the tribes to manage this project. And the KIRC hired a RES, and that's Resource Environmental Solutions, to do all of the restoration work. And to do the actual physical dam removal, they hired Kiwit. And RES has hired the Yurok Tribe, who I work for, to do the on-the-ground work. And they also hired Stantec to do some of the planning and some of the modeling. And then there's this other entity out there. There was a firm named AECOM that was the owner rep prior to these contracts being created. And they created the definite plan, which some of you, if you are familiar with this project, you know about that. That was a bit of an unfortunate document because it was super detailed, but it's not what we're going to do at all. And it's out there and people think that's what we're going to do. And it creates problems when we're trying to manage the project, particularly with state agencies. So the restoration goals are pretty simple. It's to create a free-flowing river to allow for fish passage. We want to stabilize the remaining sediments just as we were doing up on the Elwha, so that the river doesn't have long extended periods of high turbidity. And then we're going to take the opportunity to try to enhance habitat, right? Because it's a lot of land that's going to be kind of at ground zero when it comes to ecosystem development. So there is going to be some large wood structures that are going to be built, habitat complexity is going to be introduced, and that sort of thing. I'm not really going to get into the habitat enhancement piece. That's more of a heavy civil element. I'm going to talk about the reveg. So revegetation, same goals as we had in the Elwha: minimize IEV, that's invasive exotic vegetation. That's the term they use down here. And it's kind of stuck with me, I guess, because it's easier to remember. Stabilize sediment like the original goal, and accelerate the development of Salamonid habitat. So making sure that we're introducing species that are be beneficial to the river in the riparian zone. So I'm going to talk about each piece of the reveg. The first and kind of biggest piece is invasive species management. So invasive exotic vegetation, IEV management. So our goal is to minimize establishment. You'll note I don't use the word eradicate or prevent because we know it's going to come in. There's really no way to keep things like that out. We didn't in the Elwha either. We just try to keep it minimal so that our native species that we introduce are going to establish, right? So first things first is try to figure out a way to prevent dispersal, right, into the areas. So targeting the surrounding landscape to try to minimize that dispersal opportunity for the surrounding landscape to infest the reservoirs. And to do that, we're going to try to maintain a zone around access roads and staging areas, and then have a early detection and rapid response program within the reservoirs after dam removal. That's really the key. I mean, the nice thing about this project is it's a blank slate. I don't have 50 years of Himalayan blackberry living in there with a root system from hell that I have to manage. I've got nothing. And so when seedlings show up, they're manageable. And so that early detection and rapid response is key. The question is, what do you manage, right? And that's often asked of me in presentations. So I like to keep this slide in. It's complicated, but for this project, we looked at all the regional agency rankings. So the counties, the federal agencies. We have lots of BLM, lots of BLM land around here, lots of Forest Service land, Fish and Wildlife, and then the state agencies. So California Department of Fish and Wildlife, Oregon's, all of Oregon's state agencies and their classifications. And then we found 53 species that were potentially present in the watershed, mapped them, found 23 that are actually present, 30 weren't observed in the area, but we keep them on a list in case they show up. And then we try to figure out, well, how do we prioritize treatment, right? Because when you look at the landscape, Medusa head and cheatgrass and yellow straw thistle are everywhere, or teasel, it's everywhere. So we have to create ways to prioritize how we treat them and where we treat them. So we looked at the abundance on the landscape and what are the control opportunities. So in other words, and control opportunities we broke into two categories. Can we actually eradicate it? In other words, there's only one population out there. That's not, we wouldn't decide to ignore it because there's one population. That would immediately become our top priority and we'd go get it, right? And if it can't be eradicated, then we consider what's the containment opportunity. Can it be contained? So again, eradication defined by abundance. If it's 0 to 25, that's a low abundance. Let's go get it. And if we saw it in this, medium or low, then we think about containment, really. So how feasible is it to contain? We figured this out by taking a look at how close these populations are to the restoration site. Can they be controlled? Are there methods that work? And how do the seeds get dispersed, or how does the plant disperse itself? Sometimes it's not seed, right? It can be root systems. And of course, we think about these big three that are abundant and everywhere on the landscape. So they're a good example. So again, cheatgrass, yellow star thistle, and Medusa head. And the way they move is, well, on my boots, for one, there's my boots covered with Medusa head flowers, but primarily they don't move very far unless they stick to things, right? These are not species that are adapted to disperse far in the wind. They don't have wind dispersal elements. So we decided that our goal is in these areas where there's these grasslands and their high abundance, we're going to try to create a buffer of between 50 and 100 feet free of invasive species, so that minimizes the passive dispersal of seed into the reservoir. We're not going to be able to do much about hooves, sticking hooves and coming down, but at least we can deal with the passive dispersal. In some of these places, the grass is dense right to the shoreline. And so before we did any work, this is what was proposed. And last year was our first year to try to start working on management of these species. And so last year we first put down plots, because I don't like doing things without being able to see if it's going to work. And the idea of mowing to create this buffer is controversial in the sense that there's a seed bank, can you get it low enough? And so we weren't sure if it was going to work. So we did some plots. The plots just confirmed what we already knew. There's not a whole lot of natives in these areas. And here's what one of these sites look like. This is where we did the plots. This is a cheatgrass meadow. We mowed it. At this location, it took 3 or maybe 4 mows. In some places, we mowed 5 times, because you mow once and it comes back. It just resprouts. And so you need to do it a few times to do it. The other challenge with mowing is that all 3 of these species are always present at the same time, and they have different phenologies. So what's driving our mowing is really the cheatgrass, because that's the earliest plant to flower. So if they're all 3 there, it might work on cheatgrass, but maybe not the other 2. What our data showed was that cheatgrass was effectively mowed, at least as far as counting seed heads. So 87% of the seed heads were reduced by mowing. Medusa head, we saw an 88% reduction, and that was the mean. But star thistle, which is the last to flower, we saw 0 effect. So it just kept resprouting. It didn't care. And then by the time like July 1st rolled around and CAL FIRE is saying you can't use gas powered machinery anymore, we had to stop mowing. And lo and behold, well, there's a slide. There it is. Lo and behold, pure star thistle. So that's one of our mow sites where you don't see any grasses, but the star thistle went bonkers. What also surprised me, you know, I looked at this data and thought, well, the cheatgrass and the Medusa head probably is going to come back. There's a seed bank. I just don't feel like it was going to be super effective. We went back to the site, and this is a picture from just this same site where I was just showing you, and you can see there's no grass. So somehow it was very effective, very little grass. There is some grass out there, but the amount of grass is negligible compared to what we were seeing last year, which is excellent news. It means that mowing can be a strategy to knock those species back and then follow up with some spot herbicide applications to try to clean up these buffer zone areas. We also do a lot of grubbing. So especially around native species. So there's a lot of things out there that we don't want to mow, let alone spray with herbicide. So the crew goes in there and they grub. The Yurok are very dedicated to what they're doing. This is their landscape, it's their river. And so they are passionate and are willing to grub. In some places, we're only gonna grub. So in locations like oak woodlands and the native grasslands that we do find out there, the populations of invasives are not as significant. So we will grub only, we will not use herbicide, no mowing, and just pull the plants. We would probably do more grubbing across the landscape, but we found that it would take like 10 people, 75 days just to do a half an acre. So it's just not practical as a large scale removal method. So that's our new plan. We shortened the buffer depth. We're going to keep mowing, but then we're going to follow up with grubbing, spot herbicide, and then plant, so that we actually get something growing that we want to disperse into the reservoirs once dam removal occurs. And then we also look at landscape. So, is it a grassland? Okay, that's a problem. But we also want to look at some of these wetland species that are poised to disperse readily right into the river. So here's a stretch of Iron Gate where it's really narrow. And so the river is going to be right here. And here are all these reed canary grass patches and teasel and Himalayan blackberry that are poised to disperse right into the riparian zone. So that makes that area a high priority. But again, I can't manage 23 acres of the reservoir. So this is one of the ways we filter how we're going to manage the landscape. And again, as I mentioned before, it's different. It depends on the habitat. So here's an example. This is Long Gulch, and you'll see the grasslands in the upper part of this picture. So you can tell by that photo. So that's one of our mow sites. So that's where we're going to mow, spot spray. And then on the south side, you'll see that's an oak woodland. You can notice the canopy, and the abundance of invasives is only 8%. So in that area, we'll go in and grub. And then build off that oak woodland by planting an oak woodland beneath that. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. And JC Boyle is kind of as far as invasive species, might be our greatest concern because it's a shallow reservoir. That upper part, so this upper part here is only a 10-foot drop down to where the river is going to be. So we're sort of thinking about this whole landscape as being relatively moist. And there's a lot of teasel, and there's a lot of reed canary grass, and there's a lot of Dalmatian pole flax. So we want to be aggressive about treating that whole shoreline. And it's not as big of a reservoir, so that's manageable. This is the smallest of the three. I think it's only 250 acres that are going to be exposed. And then I mentioned the early detection and rapid response. I'm going to just sort of cruise through this, but basically this is just saying, get out there, make sure everyone's trained, they know how to identify plants as a seedling, train everybody, like even the fish biologists, whoever's out there doing work, and try to get the public on board and provide tools for them to also help us recognize and report populations. So those are all the different ways we're going to try to manage the reservoirs once the dam removal is finished, and we're working exclusively in the footprint. But really the biggest key to invasive species management is seeding. So in the Elwha, we didn't seed everywhere. There was a lot of natural regeneration, which I think, for those familiar with the project are aware of. But where we did seed, we had a significant reduction in the abundance of exotics. And that held true every year that we had plots, that we had data from the plots. So for 7 years, we were monitoring and we saw a significant difference where we seeded versus did not seed. So at a place that's much weedier than the Elwha, this is a critical component to what we're doing. All right, so how are we going to tackle re-veg? Once we've dealt with the invasive species, now we have dam removal, it's time to start planting. So the first thing is one of the biggest lessons learned from the Elwha is to get materials down right away. It wasn't necessarily important in the Elwha, but what the Elwha did teach us was that you have a lot of success in year one, and the success that you have when planting, planting a rooted material in particular is long lasting. So the stuff that we planted in 2011 and 2012 during dam removal had significantly higher rates of survival than when we planted 1 year later. So the reason we think that is there's residual moisture from the reservoir, right? The sediments take a while to dry out. And on the Elwha, that was, it was a slower drawdown, so that was helpful. This is going to be a much quicker drawdown, but we still feel like we get some free irrigation by sticking the plants in the ground as quickly as possible and seeding right away. We're only going to seed about 90% of the landscape because I always like to have control, meaning an area that's left alone to see what the effects are. So a control plot. So 10% of the landscape is going to be left alone to see how our treatments are performing. And we're going to seed about 80 to 100 seeds per square foot. And we have enough material to do that twice if necessary across the whole 2,000 acres. We probably won't have to do that, but we will probably have to reseed some areas. We are going to do some bare root and container plants. About 250,000 are what's proposed, which is actually less than the Elwha. Although I think in the reservoir footprints, it was a little under 300,000 in the Elwha. And down here, we're going to have to irrigate. We did not irrigate up there. We can't irrigate 2,000 acres. So we're going to just be focusing on what's called these high priority restoration areas. Those were defined by RES. These are salmon, high value tributaries that will support salmonids. So those areas, there's about 3 of them in Iron Gate. There's 2 in Copco, and there's 1 up in JC Boyle. And then we're going to also plant trees and shrubs in what we're calling facilitation patches. And so if any of you are listening, we're on the Elwha, you might have heard me talk about that there. We thought it would be important on the Elwha, but it didn't really turn out to be necessary because of the incredible natural regeneration that occurred. So to sort of explain what a facilitation patch is, it's essentially a small area, right? So we'll pick a spot and put a real dense patch of trees and shrubs in there in a pattern kind of like what you're seeing here. And the idea is when plants are really close together, they actually facilitate one another's survival. And there's a lot of ways they think this happens. This is an idea that kind of stemmed from desert ecology research done, where they kind of saw this happening. So the higher stress your environment, the more important this kind of early successional facilitation is. One of the ways that it might affect survival long-term is it could minimize herbivory if you get a nice thicket going. The way it potentially increases plant survival is simple. When you have a lot of plants close together, it's a little bit more humid because you have passive transpiration of water moving through your plant, and it needs a dry, the drier your air around the plant, the faster that transpiration goes. So in a more humid pocket, it'll slow that down and you'll get less water loss. You also can minimize invasive species because obviously you're going to get shade more quickly and you're going to occupy more space. So you're really concentrating your resources, excluding the invasives. And of course, it allows us to really focus. So if we are going to irrigate, it's not as big an area. If we want to mulch, it's not as big an area. So it just gives us more options to try to make sure that that patch survives. And so in this patch, that's where we're going to put kind of the most expensive stuff too, right? So the bare roots, the container plants, and the plugs, and then seed mixes that are hard to come by. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what we're collecting for seed mixes. It's not all easy to get, and it's not all capable of being propagated into large volumes. So the stuff that's hard to get, that's important, we would focus in these areas. And the idea for this project is we would put those patches, these facilitation patches, adjacent to healthy native patches. So this is a diagram just showing that. Here we got an open oak woodland. This is, again, that Long Gulch patch. And here's this existing oak woodland, and this color is all underwater right now, but it's going to be upland. And so the idea is we put a facilitation patch directly attached and adjacent, with the idea being there's going to be underground activity, biota, if you will, a mycorrhizae that will more quickly migrate into that patch than if we placed it somewhere farther away from an existing oak woodland. And the same thing for native grassland. And it's also a way for us to then keep our focus on those grasslands above the existing ones, because that way, we'll make sure that we continue to grub it each year and not allow invasives to influence our facilitation patches. And you'll notice here I have, here's a control. So there's the idea that there'd be a control, maybe there, maybe not that location, but it's just an idea. But as is probably something you've heard before, the biggest and best plant strategy for revegetation is diversity. And when I say diversity, I mean species diversity. I also mean plant material diversity. I mean diversity in who's producing your plant materials. You don't want to put all your eggs in one basket on any of those fronts. You need a lot of plants out there, and you need to play dumb and act as though you have no idea which ones are going to do well, and give everything a chance in all of your different locations and let them teach you what's going to work, especially on a project like this, where it's early successional, it's a whole new landscape, and you don't really know what's going to work. Plant propagation. So as you can imagine, with all these plants, we need to have a lot of material. So we're going to be using seed, bare root plants, container plants, cuttings, and some salvaged materials, but not a lot of salvaged materials. And we're going to count on natural native vegetation like we saw on the Elwha. We're constantly revising what we want to collect, and we're doing that basically on these four things. So what are the observed patterns around the reservoirs? Is there seed available? Can we easily collect propagules? Might not be seed, maybe it's cuttings. Can it be propagated, right? A lot of these things are really hard, and propagators are like, nope, I can't do that. And then can it establish naturally? If it can, then we don't really focus that hard on it. And really that's whether it's going to establish naturally or not is mostly based on long distance dispersal ability, but also whether or not it could seed bank underwater. And then of course, timing, right? So is it maturing at the right time? The exposure is happening. Those are things I think about, particularly on this project. So here's an example of a pattern observed. So here's a lupin. This is called chick lupin. It was not on the original list of species that I was supposed to look for. I had a list that I inherited when I came down, but I saw this, and lupins get me excited. Maybe you've been to the Elwha and you'll remember something like this. So here's a lupin in the Elwha, and so I'm trying to find my Klamath lupin. Lupins are nitrogen fixers. This lupin, the riverbank lupin that established really well on the Elwha, took care of a site that we had trouble getting anything to grow on, but this plant went crazy. It's facilitated other plants, so we saw our other plantings do well in the shadow of these lupins. There's some work being done to try to see if there's nitrogen fixing going on in these locations that are helping the soil biota form. And so I want something like that down here on the planet. Seed availability, that could be tricky. So here's an example. This is a real important plant, Persia tridentata, a really nice chaparral species. It could be really challenging to collect the seed. So these little single seeds form on the plant. And so the fact that it's just one seed per flower, that's challenging. But on top of that, as soon as the seed, you'll see all the seed on the plant, you'll be watching and watching. And then you come back like 1 week later when you think it's about going to be ready and they've dropped off the plant. So we found it really challenging to get the volumes I would need to produce 10,000 Persia. So it means you have to sometimes shift. And so last year was a really funky year because y'all probably remember the heat dome. The heat dome was really bad for a lot of species. And so some plants made it really difficult to collect any seed. They just shut down. But other plants reacted by producing tons of fruit. So these 3 species were excellent last year. And since we were having trouble with the Persia, we kind of just got more desert gooseberry and more birch leaf mountain mahogany and a ton of serviceberry, which is an excellent plant and doesn't usually produce real well. It can be really hard to find a lot of berries. So, you know, you have to be flexible in your planning when you're dealing with a big landscape. And then we talked a little bit about propagation feasibility. So there's a lot of things that are just hard. The lomations, people will do them, but they take years and years and years. I think I was told 5 years. It's very expensive, and I didn't have 5 years to wait. And then some things like the berberis, you know, we're doing, that's a seeding, I mean, that's a bare root field that we have here in the Rogue Valley, and it's just not doing well. That's notoriously difficult to get good germination in a bare root environment. So, you know, I'll shift away from a species like that and try to focus on something that's more productive. The likelihood to naturally establish, that's going to be wetland species. That's our experience. So there is some seed banking in reservoirs. There's not a lot. That was what my master's thesis was looking at seed banks in the Elwha before dam removal. And it told me there weren't many. So I didn't think it was going to play a big role. They assumed the same thing down here, despite the fact that this is their study that you're seeing this photo. They actually had a pretty good response compared to my thesis. But lo and behold, in the Elwha, a seed bank was actually really important. And there were a ton of wetland species. Not all these species you're looking at here are wetland species, but these are all naturally occurring plants that happen in the Elwha. And the dominant species in those early years were wetland species. There were sedges and rushes that went crazy in the understory. Just went crazy and became understory to alder. It was a very strange plant association. So we're assuming something similar here, and I have good reason to assume it. We had a drawdown in 2020. I think you saw a picture earlier. And lo and behold, all kinds of stuff started germinating. And it wasn't long enough for dispersal to have occurred from wind because it was in June. There wasn't much seed being produced yet. This was all from a seed bank. And so the wetland species, I'm not propagating. I'm not going to seed them. Not the little guys, not the herbaceous stuff. I'm going to let that come in on its own. We get all our seed from the watershed, although we do some collection from the next watershed over, which is the Rogue Valley. We do sometimes have to purchase seed because it's hard to get everything, right? So mostly like woody stuff that's available commercially, that's genetically appropriate. In other words, it's been collected originally from the Klamath. There is a lot of seed being collected by local governments like the BLM, so we do purchase from them. And we also get stuff from BFI. So there's this amazing seed producer in Washington, it's in Moses Lake, called BFI Native Seeds. And they actually collect in the Klamath for their commercial fields, and they've been doing it a long time. So we do get some of our seed that way. And then I do have a lot of micro growers here in the Rogue Valley that we've recruited, and they're doing some of the small time stuff for us. I do have a seed collection crew, so here they are. We've had 4 to 5 people for 3 years now. Over 2,000 pounds of seed has been collected, which is pretty good, from 98 different species. That seed goes to seed increase fields or is used to produce the bare root and plug material. So seed increase is when you take the seed, you send it to a place like Corvallis Plant Material Center, which is the picture you're seeing there. They grow it out in their agricultural fields, keep it weeded, and then harvest off those plants. In this case, that's a Eriophyllum lineum. They can harvest off that for several years. We have over 50 acres in production. It's taken 5 vendors across 3 states to try to produce what we need, which is between 45 to 85,000 pounds of seed. That's what we're shooting for. which is going to give us, the goal here is 19 billion pure live seeds. And it's 29 species that we found suitable for the project, right? I mean, I would probably have a bigger number of species, but that's what we can grow based on, experience out there. It's hard to start experimenting on a project like this. So we kind of go with what people have experience with. We are experimenting with a few like that lupin. So far to date, those fields have produced, they produced about 25,000 pounds in 2020. And this past year, the heat dome was a bit of a bummer. It limited our production to about 17, almost 18,000 pounds. But that's still giving us more than half of what we need. And we're contracted through 2024, maybe even 2025 to keep producing. So we're doing pretty good and we should hit our goals. We also are doing some small scale stuff, and that's either just pure wild collection where we're storing it, or we give it to small growers in the Rogue Valley, and they just do some little stuff in their farms to give us some of these species that don't grow well in a big field, like the balsam myriza. Here's another lupin that I'm shooting for, Lupinus albrifrons. And basically a lot of the, and this is Yampa, this Herbaceous, I don't know if I pronounced that right, but Yampa is a really important species culturally to all the native tribes around here, as well as all the lomations. So all of those species are those sort of special seed mixes I talked about earlier. And the lupin we've been working on a couple of years in a row now, because one of the botanists in the Rogue Valley already had a bunch of it growing because he likes it so much. And so he just collects off it and gives it to us. And we add that to our wild collection. The bare root stuff is kind of the key here. We're not going to do a whole lot of container because there's worry about Phytophthora. So most of the stuff's going to be propagated into bare root. We will, the species that we see directly are really just going to be oaks, because they do really well just directly from acorns. And those are the oaks are also going to be grown in containers because we can't count on acorn production every year. So we've been hedging our bets and collecting some every year and growing a few because they're such an important species. We want to be able to make sure we plant some. We're looking to grow about 250,000 from 33 different species, and we're going to test for Phytophthora. So that's the sudden oak death. And there are a lot of different species of Phytophthora that are a problem, and it's a real big problem in California. And the last thing you want to do is introduce it in your restoration site, because it's impossible to get rid of, and you will have killed all kinds of plants by introducing it. So super important to make sure you're working with clean material. We will do some plugs, mostly things that are difficult, like we are considering some wetland species to be produced as plugs, things like saltgrass, which can be really tough to seed, but is a really great plant because it's a creepy crawler, but it can cover a lot of ground. And we're actually looking at a lot of pollinator species to introduce as plugs as well, which include potentially trying to pursue some of the bulb producing plants, some of the lily family plants, and some of the other ones that are really abundant down here and important pollinators that are going to be hard to catch a seed. That's really difficult to do. So, and again, we'll test for Phytophthora for anything that's grown in a container. We will do some live stakes. That's willows and cottonwoods. Willows and cottonwoods can grow. You can just cut the stems in winter, put them in the ground. If they have enough moisture, they will sprout and start a new plant, and can be refrigerated up to 6 months. This was new to me. We did this in Clear Creek, which is a tributary to the Sacramento. And lo and behold, the fact that they were in there for 6 months or more, I think it was actually 9 months, we had some survival. It was incredible, but you try to avoid that if you can. But it's nice to know that, like, if you have to clear an area and you're not ready to plant, you can do some storage in cold refrigeration units for 6 months. We'll do some salvage, not much. It's just going to be opportunistic. This slide's in there because it's in a ramp and they want me to always say it, but I don't know that it's going to be a big part of what we do. It's hard and it can be time consuming, and I don't feel like you get a big bang for your buck. Not on a project of this scale. And like the Elwha, we're going to have a pretty robust monitoring program. So I'll try to zip through these slides so we get time for questions. But we're going to be doing both qualitative and quantitative surveys. The qualitative stuff, that's just, scientifically accurate, statistical surveys, and we have those methods from the Elwha. So I'm taking the Elwha methods and I'm bringing them down here. And they're going to help us. The reason they're even funding this, because normally it doesn't get funded, is there's so many eyes on this project that they have what's called success criteria, and we have to meet them as a contractor to call the project a success. And so we're just using the metrics from my plots to determine that success. And we will also do what's called the quantitative stuff is maybe not so much statistically important. It can be, in fact, our mapping of IEV can be done. We can do statistical analysis on it, but it's more for us to manage. And so we go and map every single invasive we find. And that's one of our major quantitative pieces. So the plots kind of broken into reference plots. That's stuff in the surrounding landscape. That's what's giving us our targets for success criteria. And then the plots in the reservoirs, we're going to be looking at both stuff that we did some treatments by habitat type. So oak woodlands versus a grassland. Was it seeded? Was it planted? And then control plots. And that's the areas that I mentioned where we do nothing. And we will have plots in there to see how they are performing. And then we'll have special plots, which we're doing now, to make sure that I mentioned earlier, to make sure invasive species management is working. And we might do some digital monitoring. We have a lot of drone imagery going on. I just don't think it works real well in early successional plant communities. It could be good long-term for plant cover or forest development, particularly in the J.C. Boyle area. Our success criteria are pretty simple: vegetation cover, species richness, how many woody plants are present, and how much of what's there is exotic or invasive. This is an example of I think I reversed it. The quantitative is statistically significant. Qualitative is not. Sorry about that. The qualitative, this is an example of the IEV monitoring we do. We actually, this is a picture of the Elwha. So I had the crews always keep their tracking on in the GIS, so I knew that they covered all the areas. And when they run into a species, they would put a point, and that would give us excellent data and help us with our monitoring. I mean, with our treatments. And photos are kind of one of the best qualitative methods, right? So a photo can tell you a lot. And so you have the big kinds of the landscape photo points, which we're going to have set up around the reservoirs. And then there's the plot photos. Plot photos are awesome. So if you haven't seen any of my Elwha talk, here's a series of plot photos. I'm going to do the same thing in the Klamath. So here's year one of the Elwha when it was exposed in 2012. And here's that same plot in 1 year later. Here it is 2 years later, 3 years later, 4 years later, and I think our last year was 2017. And so you can see in the Elwha, the forest developed rapidly. This plot was untreated. So this was an example of an area that was not seeded or planted. Those photos kind of would probably be enough for any agency down here. They'd be super happy with that. I don't expect that level of development in the Klamath. And of course, if our success criteria aren't being met, we have lots of ways to make sure we can figure out why. Is there something going on that we can determine? Maybe the success criteria aren't appropriate. And if necessary, we could reseed, replant, add irrigation in these areas where we haven't had it. Maybe IEV is an issue. And we can consider adding more resources like mulching, compost, or herbivore fencing, because that could be the biggest problem down there is cows and horses. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. Before I finish off, I want to make sure that I thank the people on the ground doing the work, and more importantly, the Yurok Tribe. They are the driver of dam removal. They are passionate, amazing tribe, and I love all the people that have been working for me. They are so into the work, and they've been a joy. And I also want to thank Res, because they're also a pretty great new firm. They're based out of Houston, and they have hired the Yurok and really have valued what we offer and have been an important partner. So with that, I think I might have time for questions. I'm not quite sure, but if I do, I'm happy to take some.